to protect rights and supercharge the economy, my partner and I are proud to affirm today's resolution. The United States federal government should create a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who move to the U.S. as minors, do not have felony convictions, and enlist to serve 4 years in the U.S. military. Before I go into more detail about why we're affirming today, I'd like to thank everyone here for making this debate possible and jump right into some resolutional analysis. Now, most of the terms of today's resolution are pretty self-defining. We just like to clarify that a path to citizenship is, as defined by the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, a way for immigrants residing in the U.S. to become naturalized citizens, and we're going to be seeing more of this in our plan. So what our plan is going to be is pretty much exactly what the resolution is going to be saying. We're going to be giving people who have been living in the United States and haven't committed these felonies and have agreed to enlist in the military, we will be giving them visas initially, and then they will be put on this path to citizenship, which will eventually result in them becoming a naturalized citizen. This will be instituted as soon as possible and will be enforced by normal means and paid for by normal means. This round, since it is a policy round as indicated by the word should in the resolution, is going to be weighed off of net benefits, not to any specific group, just in general to the world. So with that, let's move on to our first of two advantages. Our first advantage is going to be on the economy. Now, what we're seeing right now is that our economy has been going pretty slow because we're coming out of a recession that has been greatly affecting us, and we have been coming out, and it's been pretty much the slowest recovery since the recovery after the Great Depression. But in addition to that, we're seeing that there's very little growth in the field of where undocumented immigrant workers are trying to work, and a lot of that is coming because of how exactly they are oppressed in their system. So let's look at how exactly they are being oppressed and how we could change that. So first off, we can look at how, according to the Cato Institute, when these jobs are, when these undocumented workers become documented, when they are legalized, it increases their willingness to invest in labor market skills. So we're going to be seeing more productivity under an increase of their labor market skills, and we're going to be seeing them becoming more productive. In addition to that, the Center for American Progress elaborated that it increases the incentive to become more productive community members. So you're going to be helping to build these communities from the inside out, and you're helping to create a more unified community, which is better for economic production. So you're going to be having major benefits. In addition, the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities elaborated that the IRCA, the 1986 Immigration and Reform Control Act, proved that these undocumented workers, once they got documented, once they became legally inside the United States, they got better education and better jobs, so they improved their own quality of life, and we're helping them get out of this poverty, and poverty is one of the greatest evils in the world. Now, continuing on, in addition to that, we see that it makes it harder to search for jobs when you are actually in the country illegally, according to Sylvia Barcelos of RAND. And in addition to that, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, legalization gets workers to move and adapt. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making it so that these workers can be more productive, and we're going to be helping them to improve their own quality of life and making the economy overall much more productive, which is going to boost the GDP and make it so that as the economy is affected by the multiplier effect, more things are going to be produced. It is going to be easier for the economy to keep flowing, and more people are going to be able to get jobs. In addition to that, what we're going to be seeing is that we're going to see wages increase greatly. According to the New York Times, the Immigration Reform Act in 1986, the legalization of those workers led to an increase of a wage increase of $5,400 a year over the period of 1990 to 2007 for U.S. workers. And overall, what we're going to be seeing is that we're going to be seeing, once again, major increases in the wages for people inside the United States. In addition, analysis by UC Davis stated that legalization could raise wages for these workers by 25% or more. And the Center for American Progress elaborated that a wage increase of this size would lead to an increase of jobs and employment by anywhere from 750,000 to 900,000 jobs. So what we're going to be seeing is when we allow these workers to become more productive, we're going to help them get employed in the future, and that's going to improve their quality of life, make them productive, and help pull them out of poverty, which is due to its cyclical nature and its dehumanizing nature and how it takes away the lifespans of people and makes them have a decreased quality of life. It's overall going to be helping pull them out of this negative cycle. The third and final major reason how we're going to be improving the economy is based off of the idea of decreasing the debt. Now, according to NBC, it would lead to the incorporation of these people into the U.S. economy, since they currently are not paying taxes as undocumented immigrants, we are going to see an increase of taxes paid by these people over their lifespans of $3.1 trillion according to their estimations. So that's greatly going to go to decrease the debt and the deficit of the United States. The CBO elaborated that path to citizenship could decrease the deficit by $197 billion over the next 10 years and $700 billion over the next 20. And an even higher estimate, according to the American Action Forum, we could decrease the deficit by $2.5 trillion over the next 10 years. So overall, what we're seeing is that the economy issue is definitely going to be helping the affirmative here, because we're going to be supercharging the economy. Continuing on to Advantage 2, which is about protecting rights. Right now, according to RAND, workers are less likely to exercise their rights because of their condition. Many of them were brought over into the United States illegally, so they fear being reported to authorities and having their conditions reported. A Seton Hall University Law School report said that only 14% of sexually harassed illegal immigrants reported their sexual harassment to higher authorities, and that's overall very harmful for these people. The Democratic Policy and Communications Center elaborated that 80% of undocumented workers had been sexually harassed in their workplaces, and so that obviously goes to show that when you have this direct causal link between their inability to report their own situations and causing the sexual harassment by enabling it, by a lack of fear, what we're going to be doing is, by legalizing these workers, we're going to be letting them report the abuse that happens to them, and we're going to be improving their own workplace conditions. And since rape and sexual harassment completely dehumanizes anyone who takes part, it's clear that this is a huge reason to improve the quality of life and legalize these immigrants. In addition to this, the Southern Poverty Law Center said that, quote, virtually all women who were interviewed reported that sexual violence in the workplace is a severe problem. So this once again just goes to show how rampant this problem is. So overall, what we've seen today is that if we legalize these workers who are currently living inside the United States, we're going to be helping them to become a more productive part of the U.S. economy. That's going to make them more productive, increase the GDP, increase employment, increase wages, and we're going to be helping to better protect their rights so that we can stop all of the atrocities that come along with rape and poverty and improve their quality of life. So for all these reasons, I urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
So roadmap, off case, and then on case.
Just one up?
Gonna have 2 disads and then a CP.
Okay.
Everyone ready?
No, just 2 seconds.
Oh, yeah. So everyone's ready? Now to go into the first disad, we can talk about the cost of mental health. Now those going into the military have a significantly higher risk of coming back from the military service with PTSD and a variety of other mental health issues. Now because of the fact that these mental health issues often have to be taken care of by the United States federal government, this is just another cost and another way that the deficit and the debt that they themselves speak about will be increased already. Now if we want to look at the statistics about how much illegal immigrants take out of the current system in terms of benefits, we can see that the average illegal immigrant actually already takes about $900,000 in government welfare in their lifetime. Over their entire lifetime, they take this much. Now forcing them actually to go into the military just so they can get some sort of citizenship in our country means that we are significantly increasing their likelihood of getting this form of mental trauma, specifically things like PTSD and a variety of other mental traumas that often come out of serving in the military, which means another reason, another facet of them also taking out of this government welfare and increasing the deficit issue. Now, second, of course, there is they are infringing upon those who don't support war. Now, of course, because of the fact that the resolution itself specifies that those who are accepted into this pathway of citizenship must go into the military, enlist in the military for at least 4 years. We're inherently infringing we're infringing against those minors who are brought into the United States and don't support this sort of warfare and are either pacifists or just don't want to go into the military. And because of that, they're not really solving for a lot of their issues. Now, if we want to look at some of the issues like the economics issue and the poverty issue, if we want to see like how much they're actually solving for that issue, in terms of just looking at minors, that's already a small subsection of the around around 11 to 12 million illegal immigrants in the United States. But then confining that subsection even more to those who will agree to go into the military, that's an even smaller subsection of those who are those 11 to 12 million immigrants in the United States. If we want to look at statistics, we can see that around 24,000 illegal immigrants who come into the United States are minors. Now that, looking at the vast majority of those who are adults, is not a large group, and it doesn't really solve for any of these issues that they point out. So which is why I'm going to provide you the counter plan of the United States should provide a pathway to citizenship for students who meet the requirements of the DREAM Act. Now, as of right now, the DREAM Act does not provide a pathway to citizenship. What the DREAM Act does is allow these students who are, or minors who come into the United States who are brought by their parents as minors, it allows them to go to university, to go to college, get an education, and allows them to not be forced to be deported, but doesn't actually provide them a pathway to citizenship. Now, if we want to look at the benefits of this, we can see that there's a long-term educational benefit. Now, as of right now, there are 1.03 million students who are set to join institutions and universities because of the DREAM Act. And that means there's 1.03 million students who are going to be getting a long-term higher education. And that is not something that can be provided through the military option. That's not, in fact, that's something that is being taken away through the military option. Instead of 4 years going to a higher education, going to a university, getting a higher education, that's 4 years that are spent in the military that is experiencing a lot of traumatic events which are not very good for their health. And second, of course, is that of economic output. Now, the affirmation team tries to point out that illegal immigrants who come to the United States actually have a better economic output. Well, we can see that by giving them a pathway to actually getting citizenship and education, there's more likelihood for them to have a higher economic output. Now, we can see that those who get an education are much more likely to have a higher economic output because they have a higher salary, have higher wages, and all these things are reflected in the fact that they pay higher taxes, which once again go to the United States federal government and actually solve for these sort of economic issues that they bring up. And with that in mind, I'll take your point of information.
Doesn't the military already have programs that help to provide funding so students can go to college without being completely swamped by debt?
But they're still not solving for the fact that a lot of these people who come out of the military are faced with significant mental trauma, and that's not something that happens when you're going to a higher educational school and you're getting an education. You're still getting the economic benefits, but you're not linking into this PTSD effect or any of those problems. Now, with that in mind, I'll go ahead and refute the points brought up by the affirmation, so you can switch over to the on-case flow. So first, of course, is that of economics, and they've talked about this in a three-pronged approach. So first, I'll talk about the fact that the availability of jobs, how it's harder to get a job as an illegal immigrant. Now, once again, if we want to see how it's harder to get a job as an illegal immigrant, you're looking at the CP, because the CP is going to be solving better. Not only is it hard to get a job as of right now for anyone, it's harder to get a job when you don't have the necessary education because you spent the last 4 years in the military rather than going to get a higher education. Whereas if you're getting an education and at least getting perhaps a bachelor's degree, you have a much more likelihood of getting accepted to a job because you have that sort of necessary education that a lot of employers are looking for. So the counter plan actually solves much better in terms of this problem than the affirmation plan. Now, second of that is poverty. Now, as I said before, those who get an education are much more likely to have a higher income and are much more likely to not be those who are in poverty. So because of that, once again, the counter plan solves better, and apart from that, we don't create any sort of dehumanization argument that they talk about because of this poverty. In fact, we solve better. We're creating less dehumanization of those below the poverty line. And third is that of decreasing the debt. Once again, I must point out that we solve better because we create more opportunities for those who aren't opposed to this warfare, those who might be pacifists or just don't want to join the military. We provide a pathway for them to get a higher education and to thus link into getting a higher income, and also once again feeding that money back into the United States government so that there is a decrease in the sort of debt that they themselves talk about. So we are the ones actually solving better in this way for decreasing the debt without linking into any of these dehumanization arguments that they talk about, which really we can turn by pointing out that the dehumanization is even more increased by the fact that they are just turned into a soldier who is subjected to a lot of traumatic events, and this sort of traumatic event is actually creates a lot of dehumanization of those who they actually have to fight against. This sort of dehumanization is often perpetuated throughout the military. When people go into another area and fight, the people that they fight against are often dehumanized. So it's taking this dehumanization outside of the U.S. Outside of the U.S. borders and forcing it on these other countries, which we solve for both of those by not forcing people to go into the military. And second is the fact that they talk about people not exercising their right. Once again, we are the ones providing a better option and a more easier pathway to citizenship while providing them also a way to a high wage job, which means that they are more likely to speak out against these sort of harassment that they themselves bring up. These people who are are not at risk of being deported are more likely to speak out against this sort of harassment, and thus they will be exercising the right. And that's all stuff that is coming through the CP itself, and not being and it's solved much better through the CP than it's solved through the affirmation plan. And so because of that, I urge you to vote in the strictest negation of the resolution today. Thank you.
Make sure you read that first.
Okay, so I'm gonna go over their case, their counterplan, their case, and then our case. And I'm gonna try to signpost it because I know you told me I'm all over the floor.
So counterplan, cost of military help, then case.
Yes. Oh no, actually, one more time, sorry. So first I'm gonna go over something like that comes, like rhetoric, first of all. Secondly, their counterplan. And then third, one more time. Okay. So, rhetoric, then there are two disadvantages, because they did have disadvantages. Then their counterplan, and then there are two advantages. And then I'll go on to our plan, and just,
Do
okay.
you want the rhetoric argument flown on a separate sheet of paper?
No, it's okay, it's like, or if you want to, yeah, sure.
Are we really okay?
No, we're not. Okay, so, this whole rhetoric thing I just have is just that I do not agree with their use of illegal, because I feel like using the word illegal inherently dehumanizes these people who are actually human, and so it's offensive rhetoric, and for that reason alone they should be voted down. That should be a voter issue, because language shapes our reality. And when we label people as illegal, we inherently dehumanize them by saying that you go against our law, you cannot exist within our state, and because they do so, they completely take away the identity of these people, because these are people, these aren't just people, whether or not it's legal or illegal, these are human beings, they are our peers, they are our fellow human beings, and therefore we shouldn't be using the word illegal. But that aside, let's go into two main disadvantages to our case. The first disadvantage was that mental health issues, and I talked about how it's really costly to the United States, and so I would say the exposure to mental health is actually even greater. It's good, because the temporary cost in the United States in terms of paying out benefits for people who are suffering from mental health issues after leaving the military, we can see that it can be offset in the long term by the economic benefits Daniel brought up in his speech, because we have this positive cycle of growth and economic growth in general. And secondly, it's okay because it still will be only temporary, because we draw U.S. attention to shift to the largely untreated issue of mental illness in the military currently. And so when we do have this sudden influx of new people in the military, if let's say that this is true, this advantage is true, that people do come out of the military more mentally ill, and they do suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and so on and so forth, we see that the increased attention drawn to that issue allows us to legislate better, allows us to provide more health care, allows us to actually put attention on the issue itself, because in the status quo it's not really being dealt with. And so let's go on to their second disadvantage, and they say that it's infringing upon the rights of those who don't war. And I don't really see that how this applies, because there isn't only one pathway to citizenship. There are multiple pathways, and so this is just one that we're advocating be instituted as another pathway in the current status quo. And so that brings me to the counterplan, which is that their counterplan is that we should have a pathway for those who meet the requirements for the DREAM Act. And so my answer to that is just PERM, do both. We can pass plan and pass DREAM Act with a pick. You now have two ways to join, and so now we see that the PERM gives you more options to become a citizen, so we can get even more people to legalize, and so we get even more benefits. It just multiplies the benefits that Daniel brought up in his first speech. And also, let's say that you don't buy that PERM, still doesn't matter, because the DREAM Act still won't be as economically beneficial as the plan that we have suggested today as an affirmation, because the fact that college gives you debt, military gives you job and money for school. And so that just actually kind of brings me to their two advantages to your counterplan, which is that first, you don't get any education with the plan. And so I have two responses to that first advantage on their side. And so the first is that what Daniel brought up in his POI, that the military has programs already helping students pay off college debt, making sure that students don't leave the military, enter college and graduate with tons and tons of debt. And secondly, it's clear that there is more. And they also talked about somewhere in there are two advantages. They mentioned war and how you have more war and you're forcing people to go to war. And so, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to their second dissent to our case. So their second dissent was that bringing more people who don't want war. And I want to just say that our plan actually decreases the likelihood of war because we have more diversity in the military when we include immigrants, and so we have a more culturally diverse, informed military who won't necessarily be taking drastic action, because we're not just saying that these people are all just ground troops who take orders from generals. We can see that these people can rise up in the ranks, and when we do have that cultural diversity, when we do have that informed members of the military who understand all cultural standpoints, all cultural views, we're less likely to be neo-imperialistic and hegemonic and so on and so forth, and more respectful of other cultures in our military policy. And so that being said, let's go right back to their second advantage, their kind of plan, which is that economic output is better. And so my first and only basic response to that, they still don't account for the fact that these students will have to graduate with immense amounts of college debt, and so whereas the military does stimulate that effect, and so the military does provide funds for these people who leave the military to actually go to college because they also want them to have an education. And so I mean, college is pretty expensive, and college costs are only rising higher. And so if their plan isn't doing anything to like decrease college costs for these immigrants, so clearly they're still going to have to pay out of pocket all this money that they do not have. Whereas if you buy into our plan actually betters the status of the economic status of these immigrants in the future. So in the future, more immigrants can access education, can access higher education. And so that being said, let's go on to our plan. Our plan is just as the resolution stated, and so our first advantage is basically the economy. And Daniel came in here and gave you a whole host of impacts. He talked about how in the current status quo we have a recession, slow recovery, and little growth. And he gave you tons of cards saying how if one legalized, we increase productivity, we increase incentive to work, and that we increase minimum wage. Not minimum wage, but we increase wages for all people, not just immigrants, but also for Americans as well. We just see a beneficial overall increase in economic well-being. And so to all of this, they basically said, oh no, the counter plan solves better because you need an education for a job. But first of all, my response to that is that we permed their plan, and secondly, the military gets you the education more. And so basically we get education and no war at that point. And so I really want to just impact this out because we have to look at what a positive cycle of economic growth does for America and for these immigrants. We see that we decrease poverty, and because poverty is a form of structural violence, a form of genocide almost against the poor people, against those less socioeconomically advantaged people, we see that when we increase that, the ability to actually rise up in the social ranks, when we decrease poverty in general, we decrease dehumanization, because now these people who do choose to go into the pathway that we suggest as the affirmation, we see that they not only inform the military of decisions, but they also leave the military aware of what's going on in the world. They enter college with help from the military to get more education, and they enter the workforce educated and better able to access better jobs, and so on and so forth. And their only response was that CP solves better, but I mean, we still did perm, and we still do provide education, so their response doesn't really stand, and it wasn't really well explained in the first place. And the second and final advantage that we have is that we protect the rights. And so Daniel came up here and talked to you about how people can't really report abuse because they're afraid, because if they're undocumented, they're afraid of actually reporting it because they're afraid of deportation and so on and so forth. And he talked about sexual harassment and violence. And they basically come up here and said that, oh no, we dehumanize them by forcing them into the military, and they dehumanize people overseas. But once more, I just want to repeat once again that we decrease the likelihood of war because we have a more informed military, and these people are less, and oftentimes if these immigrants are from the countries that we are going to be intervening in, then these people are better able to inform people of the culture in that area. They're less likely to dehumanize them because they have a culture and cultural ties to the very people that they're in the country that they're intervening in. And because we decrease the likelihood of war, and because we increase education, because we have all of the advantages that the negation suggests goes for them, and because we still have all of our advantages, at this point it's the all the offense and all the defense. So I'm an ballot want to thank you.
So I guess I'll start off by addressing real quickly the rhetoric argument, then go on to the CP, then our advantages from the CP, and then going on to their case, and then the disadvantages we present. Disadvantages, then their case.
Can you read that?
Yeah, okay.
I think he means counterplan solvency when he says the advantages to our counterplan.
Yeah,
Okay.
the counterplan
Yeah,
advantages.
that's because when you said that, we thought you meant
Oh,
the
no, sorry.
disadvantages.
So like real quick, just rhetoric, counterplan, the advantages that we bring from the counterplan, then go
It's
over
called counterplan.
Yeah, that is the counterplan.
Yeah.
Oh, and the
counterplan,
okay.
then their plan, and then our dissent to their plan. Okay?
Okay, yeah, this head's on the bottom, gotcha.
Yeah, alright, so is everyone ready?
Yeah.
Okay. So first off, to address the rhetoric argument, I'm sorry, we're just referring to them as undocumented immigrants now in this debate. That really doesn't have to be a voter in this debate, so we'll just be continuing on as normal. Now go on to our own counter plan. They try to make this essentially they try and take our plan and put it with their counter plan and say that it isn't mutually exclusive and therefore we can essentially do them both at the same time. What we see is that their plan actually causes numerous amounts of harm that our counter plan avoids. They cause for PTSD and they cause for this decrease in essentially the amount of humanization for people. So because of this, our plan doesn't have these negative impacts, and because of this, their plan actually has negative harms, and therefore when you advocate for the counter plan, you're avoiding these harms that the affirmative team brings up within their own plan. So because we avoid those harms, it's also better. And we also see that there's severance because it causes their plan not to hold up. So for this reason, we have to essentially be voting for the negation of this debate because the counter plan actually avoids their negative impacts that they bring up, and we'll be bringing those forth later in this debate. So now going on to our advantage that we bring towards our own counter plan. First, we see the benefits of long-term education. Now what the affirmative team tries to do in turn this point is essentially stating that currently there are ways to help people within the United States by giving them, and the military is able to help people restabilize and give them education. But again, what we have to see is that the military option actually brings up these harms of PTSD, which is net harm towards these people who listen to the military, and they don't actually show any reasoning or any empirical examples of how people coming out of the military have actually been better off in the United States, and how people coming out of the military have actually been able to prosper. But when we can actually see the clear logical link that people who go through education are able to come out of these educational institutions actually have a better life and a better off life. But they don't show how going into the military actually benefits the overall quality of life within the United States. Because they don't actually show you this link, we can see that counterplan actually solves better because it gives people long-term education, which has long impacts that can actually go into their economy and their overall economic well-being, which brings about numerous other benefits that will be laid out later in this speech. Now also go on to the second advantage that we bring up coming off of our counterplan is the economic advantage as well. Citizenship plus education links to higher wages, and essentially this leads to a better overall economy in the United States because these people with higher wages essentially pay more taxes to the United States, which overall betters the United States economy. And this essentially brings our economic benefits towards the United States. The affirmative team tried to counter that by saying that we would rack up college debt among these people going to these institutions. But they don't understand that the DREAM Act actually compensates for this by essentially taking over the debt for these people going into college, because it essentially gives them subsidies for going into college and actually decreases the amount of cost for the college and the out-of-pocket costs that they essentially talk about. The government is able to pay for this and actually allow these people to go to college, which actually decreases the amount of cost towards the actual person, which can bring economic benefits further on down the road where debt isn't a problem for these people coming out of these educational institutions. So for this reason, the counterplan actually solves better because the DREAM Act gives economic advantages for people to actually come out of colleges and be better off, and also gives the long-term educational benefits that can allow people to seek better jobs. Now just flip over to the affirmative team's case and going over into their own advantage that they bring up. They bring up the economic advantages, and then we try and counter this by essentially saying that our counterplan essentially solves better and allows people to get a better education because it allows for people to get better higher jobs that don't necessarily come from lower education. And they again try and turn this to the college debt argument, but you can cross-apply the refutation that I gave earlier, essentially saying that the tuition is paid for by the United States federal government. Because of this, the DREAM Act actually has a better solvency, actually giving people and helping them get into the real world. Because the counterplan and the plan are mutually exclusive and can't be put together, we can see that the counterplan actually solves better. Now they also bring up the issue of poverty, and then again we show you that the counterplan actually solves better because in no way do they actually say that the people coming out of the military are actually able to rise up out of poverty and actually go and help the United States economy. They don't provide this link. They don't show people going into the military and coming out actually productive members of society, because they don't actually provide you with this link as to how people in the military are actually able to come out better members of society and actually engage in these economic benefits. They don't really show you the link. They try and extrapolate by saying that, well, they're illegal immigrants and they're going into the military and therefore they'll bring about all these other benefits, but they don't actually show that going to the military will actually trigger these economic benefits. When we show you the intrinsic links that actually show that the education that they would see by doing the DREAM Act and not trying to permanently do both and doing education and military, they're actually able to see more economic benefits and actually impact the economy in a much greater way, actually alleviating for poverty, because they don't actually show you how poverty is solved by simply going into the military. Going to the military does not solve poverty, and because of this, they don't actually link into this, and they can't actually solve for poverty within the United States. Now go on to the other point that they try and bring up, is essentially that legalization could essentially decrease the deficit. But again, what we have to understand is look towards the fact that that essentially undocumented immigrants coming out of these educational institutions, again, provide less of a strain on the United States because they're able to go for higher wage jobs and actually bring benefits towards the United States economy, because they take higher paying jobs that actually have a benefit towards the United States economy because of the taxes that they have to pay and their overall benefit towards the U.S. economy. And now going to their second point that they bring up, essentially the human rights advantage. Again, I just urge you to understand that these people who go to these educational institutions can actually actually come out better and have higher paying jobs, which avoids these negative impacts that they state within the status quo are occurring to undocumented immigrants who are unable to essentially report the harms towards women, essentially sexual violation, because these people are able to come out of these educational institutions and actually have higher paying jobs, which shows a much greater benefit towards essentially towards these undocumented immigrants, because they don't have to take these lower paying jobs. With the affirmative team tries to claim that because they're taking these lower paying jobs within the status quo, they're actually having significant harms towards their rights and their overall human rights. And essentially, we have to see that the counter plan actually solves this better by giving people the better stepping stone to actually being productive members in society. Now, we also going on to our disadvantage that we bring up to their plan. Our first disadvantage that we bring up is the cost to mental health. Now, we try to show that as going into the military has significant harm to the human people who go into the military because they actually are suffered with PTSD. Now, the affirmative team tries to counter this by saying that this is solely a temporary cost and it's offset by the economic growth that these people will receive from going into the military and then coming out and becoming productive members of society. But this is where the plan doesn't actually solve. The plan has a militaristic option. Essentially what we see here is they don't show how enlisting in the military actually spurs these economic benefits. They don't show how it does. They simply say that that the pathway to citizenship is what causes these economic benefits. And our plan includes the pathway to citizenship but doesn't make them enlist into the military. This is what the key point to this debate has to come down to, is essentially that we avoid this harm because the United States federal government still is able to enact the pathway to citizenship, but instead avoid the militaristic route which the affirmative team tries to use within their own plan, which is spurring significant harms as we stay within our PTSD argument, showing that people who come out of the military are not necessarily better off once they come out of the military, which shows that people going towards educational institutions actually have a better chance of succeeding in the economy and actually having a better overall economic impact towards the United States. So this actually, you can turn this point, this saying that temporary cost, they don't actually show how this would be a temporary cost. They essentially don't really link into this idea. Now going to our final second disadvantage, which is essentially the idea of how it hurts, making people enlist into the military really hurts their overall moral ideals because they don't really want to support the war. This is something that the affirmative team's plan really violates because they have to take the militaristic route, or else they essentially can't take this be able to seek this pathway to citizenship. Because of this, you can see that their plan actually has many negative impacts. And coming up with this, you should be voting for the negation team in this debate because our plan actually solves because we have greater educational benefits, which has spurs into greater economic benefits within the United States economy. Thank you.
So is everyone ready? Pretty much voters.
Which piece of paper you want me to have?
You can have it on the plan flow.
Okay.
On this flow. Okay. So, everyone ready? So as last speaker in the negation, I'm just going to give you the main voters in this debate. So first of that, of course, is rhetoric. Now, of course, they brought up this argument about the rhetoric and the use of illegal immigrants. We as the negation apologize for the use of illegal immigrants and the fact that they thought it was dehumanizing to these people. And of course, we refer to it from now on, and as my partner referred to it, as undocumented immigrants. We apologize for that, but that is not at all a reason that you should be dropping our team. We, of course, apologize for that, and we realize the mistake in that issue, and thus we fixed that issue, and with that on, we'll move on. So next is the point of PTSD. Now, the PTSD argument is never really truly addressed by the affirmation. Now, they try to come up here and tell you that this actually creates more incentive for people or for the government to address PTSD, but they never provide any sort of way for the government to transition any sort of funding towards this PTSD issue.
Point of order, the response to Shade's turn on their argument is completely new.
My response?
Yeah.
We've addressed PTSD in a variety of times, my partner has brought it up, I myself have brought it up.
Where's your partner's answer to this brings focus to PTSD?
It was in the last part of his arguments against the PTSD argument on the DA flow.
I don't have that argument.
No? Okay.
They can make new reputations though, can't they? They just
I
can't
mean,
make it.
well, no,
No.
if it's a new argument, then we just don't write it down.
Okay.
I also do not have a response to that argument.
You take it under consideration.
No, we just said
Okay.
point well taken.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, yes.
Alright. So then, to continue on. Even if you don't take that argument, you're still seeing that they're not fixing the PTSD issue, because by pushing them into the military, inherently you are increasing the likelihood of them having to be faced with PTSD, and they're not addressing the fact of the increased cost to the federal government itself by having to face this issue of more people facing PTSD, and of course the United States having to take on that sort of cost, which is inherent cost in and of itself to their economics argument. When they talk about the fact that there should be economic benefits coming out of this, you're seeing that's an economic cost out of government deficit. So and then you go on to look at the CP versus plan flow. Now to look at the perm versus the counter plan, you can see that we as the negation are still coming out ahead because we don't link into this PTSD argument. So because of that, you're seeing that we provide a better form and a better pathway to citizenship in that way. And apart from that, as my partner said before, they never proved to you why going into the military uniquely provides a better way of them to seek a pathway out of poverty as well. We provide to you several times the fact that getting a higher education, going into a higher institution, has always been a pathway to get out of poverty. They never provide to you why it is the military itself is a pathway to getting out of poverty. Now, in fact, we also provide to you why it is they link even more so into this dehumanization argument that they like to bring up by pointing out that this sort of military action is inherently taking this dehumanization and forcing it on people of other countries by, as often happens in war, we take our soldiers somewhere else and then they often dehumanize the populations of these other countries, which is significant harm, of course, in terms of the humanization of these other people, who we are, as the United States, don't even have sovereignty over. So because of that, you're seeing lots of significant harm coming off of the plan itself, which is not seen at all or is not linked into at all by the CP, and is not solved for in the PERM because they still link into this militarization argument. Now, of course, the next voting issue is that of economics. As I pointed out before, the PERM itself still links into this argument, the problem of increasing spending on those who are facing mental health problems coming out of war, who are still facing PTSD, who are still facing these problems. They are still linking into the idea of the government having to pay for these people, and thus increasing government spending, which once again is not good for the economic basis, which has never really been argued against by the affirmation. So because that, you're still weighing it in the favor of the negation. You're still weighing the CP over the PERM in that way. So to look at this round in terms of course, the weighing mechanism of net benefits, and also in terms of impact calculus, in terms of time frame, magnitude, and probability, you're seeing that in terms of time frame. Of course, both these timeframes are as immediate as possible. So because that, in terms of time frame, you're seeing the PTSD argument coming up as soon as possible, as no time frame has really been provided by the affirmation. The effects are as soon as possible, and because of that, you're still seeing the magnitude of the PTSD argument is still very much a big magnitude. Now, if you look at people who come out of the military, oftentimes a lot of people come out of the military with the significant mental trauma, and because of that, there is a huge magnitude of the sort of mental trauma being faced by those going into the military and then coming out of the military and trying to sort of assimilate into civilian culture. They're often faced with these sort of detriments. And looking at probability, you can see that, as I said before, there is a significant probability of those who go into the military coming out with this sort of mental trauma and this sort of PTSD. And because of that, you're weighing in the favor of the negation. If you want to look at economics in terms of time frame and probability and magnitude, you're once again seeing the time frame is immediate. Probability, you're seeing the magnitude is, of course, you're having to pay for a lot more people who are coming out of the military with PTSD, and thus the United States federal government has to take on those sort of costs and cannot put it elsewhere, which is increasing the amount of government spending, and especially deficit spending, which is the big internalizing impact that you're seeing coming out of this argument. So with that in mind, you're weighing once again in favor of the negation. So if you want to look at this round overall in terms of net benefits, you're not seeing any net benefits coming off of the plan. In fact, you're seeing more net benefits coming off of the negation's counter plan, and it actually solves even better than any sort of terms they have made. So with that in mind, you're voting for the negation.
I'm just gonna go over voters, mainly comparing plan to counter plan. I don't think you'll need a separate sheet, Zach.
Okay.
And I'll make sure I signpost as I go along. Is everyone good?
So plan and then the counter plan?
Yeah. Just like comparing the two. Comparative advantage.
He's gonna give an overview and then
Yeah.
signpost for us.
Yeah, that works.
Okay. At the end of today's debate, we need to see that the comparative advantages of the PERM itself definitely outweigh any of the benefits of the counterclaim on its own. So what we're really going to be seeing here is that when we want to look at the debate and the differences between the perm and the counterclaim itself, we need to look at how you have the choice under the affirmations perm. When you have the choice, you have the option of going to college, or you have the option of joining the military and going through that route. So you now have even more people. You now have two of these different options. So what I would like to point out here is one of the crucial things that they dropped that Shay brought up right after she mentioned the perm. Shay told you that when you now have two options, you now have two ways for these people to get involved and get on the path to citizenship, which therefore goes to show that more people will be joining the U.S., will be being put on this path to citizenship. So they completely let it fly. They completely conceded that there are going to be more people participating in this path to citizenship under the perm than under the CP on its own. So there's a great solvency deficit between the perm and the counterclaim. So when that solvency deficit means that we have greater and stronger links to all of the impacts that we've brought up today under the affirmation case, that goes to show how much stronger the affirmation case is than anything that the negation has told you about. In addition, the negation tried to tell you that there were some major problems with the affirmation case because in their two disadvantages that they brought up. They talked to you about mental health, they talked to you about infringing on the rights of war supporters and all of that. Oh, that's great, thank you. Okay. Thank you. So what we're really going to be seeing is that there are two major reasons why you can't buy either of these arguments. First, on their first disadvantage, they completely dropped Shay's turn that was that when you have the through all of this process, through the affirmation plan, there's going to be more attention on these people who have PTSD, so that is going to be actually bringing attention to it, increasing legislation and increasing the treatment for these people, and therefore actually in the long term improving mental health and decreasing the PTSD in the United States. So their entire first disadvantage has disappeared now, and their second disadvantage was about infringing on the rights of war supporters, and they once again here dropped Shay's turn that told you that when you have a more diverse military, which is what we're going to have under the affirmations perm, then you are going to have less war. So what that means is that that's the single biggest impact in this round, because when the affirmation has a clear link to decreasing war, then that stops all the dehumanization that both sides have talked to you about. The negation came up here and spent a lot of time talking to you about how war ends up with the U.S. getting involved in other countries that we don't have sovereignty over and infringing on their rights, and that's what we're actually going to be decreasing, because they considered the argument that we are going to be decreasing war in the long run, which means that we have access to that single biggest impact in this round. In addition, now moving on, just some more reasons why the perm itself is preferable to the counterclaim. They talk to you about let's talk about the economics of the two situations. In addition to the solvency deficit that comes on the negation side, we're going to see that they completely dropped what Shay told you about how the DREAM Act was not as economically beneficial. They tried to tell you that the military doesn't give you a path out of poverty, but Shay actually brought up how the military gives you a job and it gives you money for school, so that has all of the benefits of the counterplan on its own, and it also has the initial benefit of giving you a job straight out, which helps you get employment, that gets you money to start off with, and it makes it so that you don't have to come out of debt. In response to this, they tried to tell you that the DREAM Act gives you money for college, but the DREAM Act doesn't actually give you the money for college. I know this is a new response, but it's because it's my first chance to do so. The DREAM Act is just saying that you are now going to be able to go to these colleges and you will be able to become a citizen. It doesn't actually say that you will be getting scholarships. Nowhere in the DREAM Act does it promise scholarships. So what we need to see here is that the counterplan by itself doesn't give you the benefits of the perm as a whole, because under the perm you have the ability to choose, you have the ability to decrease that solvency deficit, because you're going to have the ability to either go to college straight off or join the military and then possibly go to college if you choose. Either way, you're going to be improving the situation of all of these people and all the people in these situations. So, you know what, I could waste your time with another minute of speaking, but I'm good.
Alright.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever ended a
You might
speech
take
like
a feedback first.
No, I don't know.
Okay.
But we should make a decision because it's another next
Yeah.
round.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I know what I'm voting, but.
Yeah.
okay.
Do you need a minute, Brandon?
Probably to write a because of RD, but I know where I'm voting.
Well, you can just go last.
Yeah, it's fine.
Okay.
Oh,
I vote
sorry,
aye.
F.
I
No.
Yeah, sorry, F.
I vote F.
Yeah, it is a 3-0 decision for the affirmative.
Okay, so I loved your first point. I'm so excited. So many facts, so many impacts. I think you're missing some big ones, like crime goes down when people are legal, and that's a really big one. The other reason is why are you guys just like ignoring the military entirely? Like you just act like it's not part of the resolution that you were given. Like put advantage on that. Like more people in the military equals more hard power. Like that's a really easy one for you. The other thing is like I would have included in your plan that you're including ROTC, like, and I just would have made that specific that you're like, oh, okay, I'm not forcing it, it's not just enlisting, like you also have that option, because then the military pays entirely for your college education and you can usually get accepted into schools you wouldn't normally get into, and like, they don't really have anything because the DREAM Act doesn't give them money, but like that would have really killed it.
Okay.
The dehume argument is good, impact it out more. So counter plan. Well, first off, mental health dysad. You guys talk about PTSD all the time. Why not just go with death? Like that's worse than PTSD is dying. Potentially, I guess that's up to you if you want. And so I would have made that stronger. I also would have said, I would have made an argument about the fact that we already have a system where essentially the wealthy and the people who make the decisions about whether we go to war are not the ones who fight the war. So now you're just going to extend that. This potentially leads to more war, right? Because most people don't actually feel the harms of war, only the lower class. And you've essentially created a system of slavery where the only system you have for social mobility is that you have to give up your life to become a citizen here. Don't you think that's a pretty high price to pay? Don't you think it's incredibly unfair that some demographics, because we are really talking about particularly Hispanics, that they have to give their life to become a citizen, but other people just get the option. So anyways, like there could have been a lot better, just like way bigger disads. Also same with the moral ideals. Like if you're making any arguments that don't directly link to like hard power, then your impacts need to be better. Why didn't you just go with C plan, like we're gonna do what you're doing but no military, we're just gonna give citizenship? Like I think you could have, because you don't make this argument until your final speech, but you're right, you capture solvency far better, right? Like how many people are actually gonna go to college? Like the group of people that you're talking about is so much smaller than theirs that you just lose on magnitude, like immediately. So yeah, I would have done counter plan, just no military, and spent all my time talking about disads on why war is bad and how this is unfair. Like, and then you totally capture all their advantages on the same one you wouldn't even have to really do it on. You'd be like, we agree.
That's what I was expecting after the disads.
Yeah, are you good? Can I step in?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that like the counterplan you wrote was a pick for the DREAM Act, but because of the way the resolution was run, even though this debate was supposed to be about those things, because of the way it was written, it made your counterplan mutually exclusive as opposed to a pick. So you just have to pay very close attention to the way the resolution is worded, and especially the way the PMC reads the plan text, and then figure out a way to remove a section of that as part of your advocacy. Because I think that I thought that the argument in the MG that college equals debt, military equals money for school and job skills needed to be a much more substantive part of the PMR. Because your argument is the military, well, first of all, both teams need to stop saying that well, they don't have an example and we have empirics, and then not give an empiric. You did not give me a single empiric as to why education means that you can get out. I got an education, all I got from it was debt. So when you say that and you don't provide an empiric, there's really no way for me to calculate it, and it just forces me to it leaves the door open for me to think of all the reasons why you're wrong, and you don't provide an actual substantive example of why your example is true. So I think that could have been a good place to debate. Honestly, I think that there needs both rebuttals need to do more impact calculus.
No voters too.
You say all the right words, you use the taglines, but you do not explain you say PTSD impacts happen as soon as possible. You don't have uniqueness for more soldiers go to war. Also, we're kind of ending our wars, so even if we add people to the military, probably not going to go get PTSD from fighting. On the flip side, on the flip side, you can also make arguments to how people in the military get PTSD from other reasons, like being sexually assaulted by like their peers. But the point is, it's just that like their PTSD scenario is all about war. We are definitely ending the two major wars that we're fighting, which means that probably doesn't matter. So yeah, I think that like really needs more comparison, and so like the impacting is more about explaining like the word that is missing from the LOR more than anything else is the word because. And I think that if you just practice, like when you practice debating, just practice saying the word because, like such and such is true, because, and then just practice like making yourself give examples for those. It'll help you go a long way. It'll help you go a long way with dealing with that. For the MO, I thought that like you need like better coverage because like you practically concede you concede offense on both pieces of on both of your disadvantages. You concede that this draws attention to military health or mental health, and you also concede that this brought like a more diverse war. And what Kate said was absolutely true. Like the people at the top are not going to be more diverse. It's only the color of the bodies that are lying in the sand. So like you can definitely just like flip that argument back on them very very easily. But like
I've actually lost this debate on that.
yeah, I mean, that's just like, that turns your offense towards them because now it's saying that like, oh, well, even if people get PTSD in the short term, like at least we will be able to solve everyone's PTSD on the long term, which means that you have a small impact there just in terms of how long people suffer from it. But then the second one is just like, we do not externalize externalize the dehumanization onto others because we make it so that when we do have troops, they do not want to fight wars. So I think at that point, like you don't really have offense, and then the permutation has double solvency because it like gives people multiple options. Also, I think that both teams could have made status quo arguments about like what status quo path to citizenship. You kind of do that in the MG, but not really. And then the PMR obviously goes for the two channels of citizenship via the permutation, which I think is like enough to resolve it. Plus you jack the internal link to college by saying that the military provides money for college. So even if I think your arguments are true, that they don't give examples of how the military gives them like skills which make them better employees, I do think that it gives them money for school, which the DREAM Act doesn't. Like you make that claim in the MO and you do not provide a warrant for it, and I'm like 99% sure that that's just false. And so when you don't provide a warrant for why it's true and he says no, like that means that like on the balance, the arguments are as true as one another, and at that point I use what I know as like the 50-50 tiebreaker. So yeah.
I think overall, I think the block concedes way too many offensive MG arguments to win in the end. I think that I don't think the MG arguments in general are that incredibly compelling, but it's conceded that apparently putting more people in the military means that we understand cultures more, which means that we don't have wars more, which probably gets out of not only the dehumanization impact, but the PTSD impacts, but also more people dying from war. It also means that so was it? Oh yeah. Also, the permutation allows more people to go to school in the aggregate, which means and military in the aggregate, which means more people with citizenship, which falls back for advantage one in poverty and structural discrimination, oppression even more, which isn't flagged as it, but it seems like the most important impact from the way that everyone's characterizing the debate round. And I think that as soon as they answer that DREAM Act does not fund schools or fund education, and the military is the only way out for some individuals, that means the DREAM Act probably results in a net loss in poverty and structural oppression from those impacts as well. I mean, all of the MG arguments basically internally turn all of your offense in the end of the round. So yeah, I think that more terminalization and weighing of impact sooner would probably help everyone in this debate, explaining why dehumanization would be more important than economic decline, or why economic decline and causing poverty would be more important than dehumanization, or why economic decline is the internal link to people being dehumanized, or all these arguments are things that should be done, all this should be work that is done inside of the debate round to explain why people's impacts come first. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter because the AF is winning an internal link to pretty much every other impact in the debate anyway. But that would probably be good. I also think that the notions of we should avoid PTSD because we don't want to pay for them is kind of highly offensive in a number of ways. But yeah, that's about it.
Wait, who said that?
Their thesis of the disad is we need to prevent people from getting PTSD because it will cost a shit ton of money.
Oh yeah.
That's the impact of the disad, and I'm saying that is highly ableist.
So yeah, I guess so. It's just a question of like, what about the argument is the impact? Like, instead of focusing on the cost to others, you can focus on the impacts of PTSD on the individual.
Like, there's a lot of reasons why forced trauma for being ordered to kill a bunch of people is bad.
Shitty.
That is beyond it costs money.
Yeah.
I'd say one last thing, so you guys come in with these great econ, like, they call you out on the fact that you need to expand a little bit more on that link with the military, like, you need to, like, this will provide, not just sort of like, you kind of do it because you're like, they'll get money because they have a job now in the military, but you could also be like, this is really great skills, great social mobility, like, it basically gets poor people working with rich people, like,